This is Anthony Metivier. You're listening to the Magnetic Memory Method podcast from magneticmemorymethod.com, coming to you live from Tel Aviv with my good friend Jonathan Levi. Jonathan's been on the show many, many times before. You know him from Super Learner. You know, this is a universe where you can learn how to learn faster with greater comprehension, greater memory of what it is that you want to learn. And every time that we speak, he's been on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast so many times. It's just absolutely incredible what I learn. It's incredible what you learn. And we're going to freewheel it a little bit. We've got some background noise and so on, but it would be a lost opportunity if we didn't, just jump on the fact that we're together hanging out in Tel Aviv and have a talk about how you can learn and memorize more information and do so in a way that feels great, is a load of fun, reduces stress from your life, and just makes everything better so that you can make the world better, which is exactly what this is all about, really. I mean, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I would say that I really liked, I was actually editing a video today from the last time that you were in Tel Aviv, and it resonated. You said something that I often say, and I think a lot of people in our position, in our very fortunate position to help people and educate people for a living, often say, I think Tony Robbins says it a lot as well, which is you have a unique gift, and it is your duty and obligation. We say it in Branding You. It is your duty and obligation to figure out what that gift is as soon as possible, and then arm yourself with the tools that allow you to deliver that gift. And I think the sooner you do that, the more quickly you realize your potential in life, you realize your purpose. And then it ties all the way back to Viktor Frankl. Like, all you need in life to be happy is a purpose, a worthwhile purpose, and then that just sets your trajectory in life of what you're going to do, the skills you're going to acquire, the things you're going to learn about, the people you're going to be with. It all comes from that purpose.
So then riddle me this, if I can quote Batman or
Yes.
the Batman movies. Why is it that some of us know our purpose and some don't? And for those of us that do, what's like an example from your own life that got you to know your purpose, and how did you take that knowledge of knowing your purpose and turn it essentially into a self-sustaining engine that just drives you towards doing what you've accomplished and creates the it's the fire that burns itself, or the burning bush. We're here in the land of the burning bush.
We are in the land of the burning bush.
How does that work?
That's a tough question. Why do some people know and some people not know? Well, I think the first question is, why do some people seek and some people do not seek? I think a lot of people go through their lives not seeking more. I call it the prefix approach to life, or prefix, if you will, prefix menu approach to life versus the a la carte approach to life. And I think in order to really be seeking and searching for your purpose, your mission in life, you have to take the approach that my life is a la carte, in the sense that I can pick and choose from certain things. I mean, I can pick and choose if I want to have kids, and I can pick and choose if I want to work in an office, and I can pick and choose, and so on. So I think that's a big component of why people struggle to find their purpose. But I think the other thing is we somehow along the way through the industrial era have kind of all settled on this stability over excitement mentality, and a lot of parents raise their kids, get an education, get a good stable job, and that's wonderful. Stability is great, especially if you're raising a family, but I think we need to get over this mentality that stability comes at the expense of excitement. You can have both. I know a lot of people who have super stable jobs, who are working at a very stable corporate, and they're doing their life's purpose. They're really excited about what they're doing. So I reject the idea that you have to give up on a purpose and just go to a 9-to-5 that you hate.
Right. Now, let's make this even more localized to a particular memory subject, because a lot of people, let's say they want to learn a new language, right? And they think, well, I work from 9 to 5, and I am with my kids until whatever late night, and I have 6 hours to sleep, and then I get up, and then I got to shave and shower and get in the car, and so on and so forth. And they have endless reasons why that they can't not only just spend time learning a language, but use the memory techniques that I teach and that you teach in order to be able to get the components of the language into memory. Like, where did they just begin, given what you've said, about where's the entry point to getting started and then keeping going, so that you have a different mindset for it and actual execution of learning, given the situation they're in?
Learning anything? Well, learning kind of in the direction of your purpose, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, if your purpose is to say, you need to learn a language in order to fulfill a particular purpose. You know?
Sure. So a few different thoughts there. One is I find when you work on things, when you find that right thing, the resistance goes away, right? Like you can drag your feet on projects for years, and you and I know we've dragged our feet individually on projects. That's a pretty good indication. If you have to like force yourself to do something, it's a pretty good indication that's not your calling and not your purpose. And I think you need to listen and be true to yourself and ask yourself what your motives are to do certain things. With that said, I mean, there are pragmatic considerations and concerns around generating time, which, you know, I talk about a lot in my productivity course. How do you make time? And I think for most people, the psychological boundary of busyness and how much time they actually have is much more significant than the actual pragmatic, realistic constraints on their time. And how many of us waste that 20 minutes waiting for the bus? How many of us waste that time sitting on the bus? How many of us, you know, while our kids are brushing their teeth for school, are sitting there like flipping through Facebook instead of reviewing our whatever it is, in your case, memorizing a deck of cards, because that's part of your purpose, is empowering people with memory. I think we need to be realistic about actually how busy we are and actually how well we're using our time. I'm well known for tracking everything I do, and I can tell you on any given day how productive I am in percentages, because I track how my time is being spent on my computer. And once you start doing these things, you start looking at yourself and your life through an optimization mindset. What you discover is quite surprising. Like those 5-minute breaks that you spend on Facebook amount to an hour and a half of time. And unless and until you track, you have no insight into that. So that would be my advice, is like, be honest with yourself. How busy are you really? And then the first thing where I was trying to get is like, why is it that you're not making time for these things? Because that's also a good indication. When I decided I want to learn piano, which is part of my mission, right? I want to inspire people to learn anything. I can't do that if I don't play musical instruments. It's amazing how much time I make, Anthony. It's amazing. Like, I put off breakfast some mornings because I'm just like, you know, I'll have like a quick breakfast and a smoothie so that I can use my hands to like play piano while I wait for my first call in the morning. Because I love it and I'm so passionate about it. And the first thing I wanted to talk to you when you came to Tel Aviv was like, dude, how are you memorizing this? How can I figure out these chord structures? Like, we talked for the night you came, we talked for 2.5 hours on the beach about mnemonic techniques for music. That's a pretty good sign that that's like serving my purpose and my mission. Even though I'm not a musician, I'm pretty damn excited about teaching other people and empowering other people to learn musical instruments or whatever. So,
all right, well, let's talk about that, because I'm glad you mentioned that, because last week, the reason why I released last week's podcast, now I have to make a note to myself to actually release this podcast this week, so that actually last week's podcast is last week's podcast,
sure,
because I often do things out of order. But the thing is that you were asking me about memorizing music and so forth, and I'd been talking about it on the podcast with John McFedrin, who has just brilliant ideas about it of his own accord and so forth. And I thought, you know, I am not done with these ideas. I haven't fully gone through it and everything, but I'm going to get this off my chest because I'm so excited about it, and I'm going to do it partially as like a tribute to you, a gift to you,
Thank you,
and with deep acknowledgement to John, and also just to get something out that I've been thinking about and working with and so forth. And by the same token, you were like, yes, I get it. Like, you understand exactly where I'm coming from. But at the same time, you were deeply unsatisfied by it. And you said, you know, like there has to be a better way, kind of thing. So take us through two things. First, you know, what is it from a super learner perspective that you've been doing, like the top 2 to 3 things that have gotten you where you are with music? Because I sat and watched you play, and which was amazing. And then what is it, you know, either with specific or just general reference to what I told you that night, that sort of deeply unsatisfied you, and what you maybe found interesting about it or whatever. I mean, just jam on it.
So first, I have to say, I've spent so much time with you in the last few days in person. I haven't listened to the podcast episode, but I feel like I got a pretty good idea based on what you explained to me. There were a few things that I thought were absolutely brilliant, like using the major method for notes and stuff like that. I think is really, really clever, and like on the fretboard, I think is really, really clever. It's a lot of work, but then memorizing all the notes on the fretboard is going to be a lot of work. I'll first say my difficulty, and then I'll say what I'm doing. My difficulty is, and this is at the core of how you and I teach differently, I like systems because I'd rather be 80% to 100% of people and you like methods because you'd rather be 100% flexible to 80% of people. And I think I cater to an audience who wants to know precise, like students ask me all the time, how often should I pause in making markers or visual symbols, we call markers. How often should I pause? Every paragraph, every 2 paragraphs, they want exact specific numbers. And the truth is, it depends. It depends on you, it depends on your working memory capacity, it depends on what you're reading, obviously, it depends on how long the paragraphs are, yada, yada, yada. But my students seem to want systems, and they want things nailed down very, very specifically, and then I'm of the belief that you need to know the rules really well before you break them. Like, for example, a non-native English speaker could never start a sentence with "and," but Gary Halbert and Anthony Metivier, who have a perfect command of copywriting and English speaking, can and know how, even though that's wrong technically. And it's kind of like you need to know the magnetic memory method really well to break the rules, but I would believe, but your approach is make your own rules. It's a method, not a system. So I think that was my difficulty is I mean, you've seen how I run my business as well. Like, everything is a system. We know exactly how many characters are allowed to go into this title, and we know exactly what settings to use on every single blog post we do, and we have exact processes that are never deviated from. And I think that would drive some people crazy, but that's kind of how I operate. It's the German passport, what can I say? Here's what I've been doing to accelerate the learning of music. First things first, the first thing I needed to do was memorize each of the keys, as in the physical keys on the piano, and I needed to know what each one of them were. So I came up with a nice little mnemonic technique where each one looks like a certain thing. For example, the D is in between 2 other white keys which face inward towards it. So that, to me, as someone who speaks Spanish, was dentro in between. And the one next to it to the right was E, which for me it's facing backwards into the cluster, espalda, which literally means back, as in physical, your back, not backwards. And so on and so forth. The F key is facing forward into a cluster, so that's F. And that's how I did that, and within 2 or 3 minutes, I could look at any one and know exactly what it was. I mean, that's easy stuff. I'm using essentially a very similar way that you are to memorize the songs, essentially, and I've been using that with guitar for some time. And I'm still trying to figure out a lot of other stuff. I'm doing a lot of like brute force learning, so not just reading music, but also figuring it out on my own and just understanding like what different intervals sound like. So one of the things we teach in our course is this idea, like brute force learning. A lot of people will just go to a piano tutor and then just do the piano tutor's homework. I'm like watching YouTube videos, memorizing songs that I would never be able to read in sheet music to get familiar with the finger movement. I'm writing out sheet music as I hear it. I'm doing all different kinds of multi-faceted approaches so that it's not just me and the book and the piano tutor. It's a holistic approach to learning.
Now, how are you doing that systematically, though?
That's a big problem for me. I haven't really conquered. I'm doing it kind of as I feel, and really what I'm doing is I'm using it as a frustration avoidance mechanism. Like when I get really, really sick of playing Jingle Bells, which is something I can actually read because it's very easy, then I go to a really, really hard song that I know it's gonna take me about 10 seconds to figure out each chord as it's written, because I haven't even started learning chords, and then that kind of breaks my frustration, creates a new frustration. When I get tired of that, maybe in the next session what I'll do is I'll just sound something out, or I'll watch a YouTube video which just shows me which keys to press, and then later I'll reverse engineer it by looking at the music. So it's really ironically, it's not a system, it's a method, and my method is go until I get frustrated, but if I still want to keep playing, jump from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing so that I'm still getting in the hours, because I get really frustrated super fast playing Jingle Bells 100 times.
Right. Well, the reason why I asked that, and it wasn't meant to be a a nasty thing to do.
No.
But pedagogically, I mean, one of the things that I think makes us interesting people to follow and listen is we're pretty, well, not pretty, we're 100% transparent about the things that we do, right? We're out there. We've got our heart on our sleeves, and one of the things that I always say when I talk about it being a method and so forth is I also always say 1 is the most dangerous number in the world. Like, you need multiple teachers.
Totally.
You need multiple exposure to how people do things in multiple ways, and you don't teach how to learn music yet. But I'm really fascinated about how you think that you could turn what you're doing, exploring your mixing system with method and so forth,
Sure.
how you could turn that into a systematic approach that matches what you already teach systematically in superlearning.
Yeah, well, I think the closest thing to a system that I've seen is your use of major method. And then I really like the idea. I know you're not huge on PAO, person action object, but I really like this idea of, much music is either 3/4 time or 4/4 common time. So I like this idea of having PAO for 3/4 time and PAAO, person action adjective object. So for example, C, D, G, E, I would have C as a PAAO. So C could always be Charles Manson crunching on, or Charles Manson chewing on crunchy capers. And then, so if C is the first piece in that, what's it called? I learn all the Hebrew bar of music, like
right.
it's a bar, right? Shura. Anyway, if C is the first in there, then it would be Charles Manson, and then the next one is D, which would be David Bowie diving into deep. What was it? David Bowie diving into deep dragons or something like that. Then I would use the diving. So Charles Manson diving, and so on and so forth. And then you just create a visual symbol, which I'm sure your audience knows all about, and then you put it into memory palaces. Now, here's where you and I differ. So up until that point, you and I somewhat agree. You believe that you should vary every single time, the P, the A, the O. I say, like, let me just learn C, D, E, A through G, and have one PAAO thing. That's a system versus a method. So for me, it's always Charles Manson chewing on crunchy capers. So there's your system, and then again, where you and I would differ is I would want a system that says the first verse is always in the first, this corner, and then the second, the chorus is always in a corner of the room, and then so on and so forth. There are choruses or hallways. The refrain is always in the bathroom. I'd want something like that, so that if I ever just want to jump in at a certain point in the song, I think that would drive you nuts, if I'm not mistaken.
Actually, I think that this is a good discussion point, because I think people misunderstand what I mean by system versus method. Because the kinds of systematic things that you're talking about, and PAO, and I don't like PAO and all that sort of stuff, it's not so much that I don't like PAO, it's just that when you're using major method actually is not a system. It is a method, right?
Fair.
So when you're doing something like what you're talking about, what I think is so exciting and what my mind leaps on, and I would instantly adopt systematically, is you mentioned Charles Manson and David Bowie. Both of those guys have strong ties to the world of music, right? So what I would do in a systematic way is say to myself, as I'm memorizing music, every character comes from the world of music. Right? Now you're getting into semantics, whether that's methodological or systematic. But if you said that it must be someone from the world of music, right, then you are giving yourself an aid to recall. Because if you're searching for something, right,
Sure,
you instantly already have a hook. It must be someone from the world of music. So who could it be? Well, there's only so many notes in the scale. Right? So there are a lot of systematic things in the magnetic memory method.
Right.
But why I insist on the methodological thing is because a lot of the training out there comes from people who develop the techniques for competition. And the material that you memorize in competition lends itself to systematicity.
Right. It's always the same competition, the same events, stuff like that.
Right. But language learning does not lend itself to systematicity.
That's fair.
And there, as far as I know, are no real substantial language learning competitions, and that's because the margin for cheating would be so high because people
Right.
could pose as not knowing languages, right? And they could,
Well, that and like it's so hard to test actual fluency.
yes,
You know what I mean? Like it's hard to define fluency, much less test it.
right. But I'm glad these things came up because I think that, again, it just sort of reinforces my pedagogical philosophy that one is the most dangerous number that you will ever know, and you need multiple teachers. And that's why I like to go and study from you, for example, and be around you and study you, because you challenge my preposition or my assumptions and my presuppositions, and I grow and I think and I apply and I implement and so forth, and I've gotten faster at certain things that I do. And also you've broken down certain walls of stubbornness that I have, which, against all odds, because I'm a cranky professor, sometimes, and I surprise myself. And so I really encourage people who are listening to this who don't know Jonathan, or you have come across him but haven't dived in and just gotten into the super learner way of doing things, to go and do that. My only caveat being that you implement, because it doesn't matter how many people that you study from, if you're not taking action on what they're teaching you, then it's not going to go anywhere. So who is someone that you've recently learned something from, where you went from this is a concept or an idea or a process and you leapt on it and then you got a result? What comes to mind?
Wow.
I mean, maybe there's multiple things, but
Put me on the spot there. Let's think. Someone that I've immediately put something into practice and it has just worked. Haha. I'm going to give a shout out to our head of marketing, Mr. Stephen Prattley, because I wrote out this whole webinar thing. I wanted to host a webinar for my audience to educate them, basically I want to my goal is to reach 1 million people. If your audience doesn't know, I want to teach 1 million people how to learn more effectively. One of the best ways to do that and still be able to pay your bills is do a free 1-hour webinar, which teaches them, a lot of the basics and gets them up and running. I can get that in front of 1 million people, and then at the end you offer them to join your premium training, and so I can also afford to advertise and send that out to 1 million people. And I had written like these slides, and Steven's like, look, this is good, but let me show you this webinar that I think it was like Frank Kern did, one of the folks that you admire so much. And he sends me this thing, and I just read through it. I'm like, whoa, like this goes through, you as a story consultant will love, like it goes through the whole story, why this works this way and how this works this way, and it's not, the hero's journey, and it's brilliant. And I put it into place. Like the next day I just wrote out all the slides and boom, 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 and I think we're going to be delivering a similar version of that to your audience very shortly here. And boy, did it work. Like people were in the chat and they were going nuts, and they really appreciated it so much more than they would have if it were just my like boring presentation on like, here are the top 3 tips that you could. So it worked really well, and we were very fortunate to have a few people join also our premium training, and they've been enjoying it really well because they've had this nice primer to get into it. So that I think would be the example.
I'm glad that you raised that, because one thing that I'm always itching and burning to talk about, and it's a very uncomfortable subject, or at least it's often received very poorly, and it can lead to something that I find so extraordinarily paradoxical that I can't quite understand it. And it's this. It's that some people, after a promotion, because we are rewarded handsomely for the work that we do, and when we do promotions, which we do our best to help people understand the value that we offer and to compel them to take action so that they can get the kind of results to lead the lives that they want to leave. Sorry, please do not take that as an advertisement for Final Exit, but which is a book, by the way. But the lives that they want to lead, and how that they want to learn at a higher level and be able to remember more and do it in ways that are fun and so forth. The strangest things happen, which is that I get multi-paragraph emails of people who say, man, I was just like so skeptical of your stuff, and there's certain things about your marketing that just kind of, rub the wrong way and so forth, but I took a chance on this, and it's just unbelievable what happened. In 6 weeks I memorized 1,000 words, or I just finally am able to learn at a way that's fun, and I'm remembering stuff, and it's just changed my life. On the other hand, emails come in from people, and I'm not going to quote this person, but someone swore at me. They basically said in a couple sentences that I'm completely out of my mind, that they hate me, they wish that I would go to hell, and so forth. And
Use some pretty offensive language, if I remember.
Well, it puts I don't want to give that person who may or may not be listening right now some feeling that they have power or whatever, but it puts a knife in my heart. And the reason why is because that person obviously needs the same help that the person who succeeded needed, right? And why is it that some people, they come to these webinars that we do, which have different levels of free training based on where you may be at, right? Why is it that instead of turning the channel when it's not for them, right, they feel that they have to throw a stone and be filled with hatred and try to destroy, as opposed to just turning the channel or taking action and giving something a try, because we give these extraordinary guarantees, Like, what's going on here? I just don't, I want to understand it.
What's funny is I often have to be given the advice that I give again, and I'm going to give you the advice that you give, which is great. That's awesome, because I think it's Gary Halbert who says, and you introduced me to Gary Halbert, who says, like, if you're not pissing a couple people off, then you're not being provocative enough. And I would love for everyone to love me, and I would love to never get an email that says, hey, you kind of look like a sleazebag in this video or whatever. But the vast majority of people are getting impacted because it is out there, because I'm telling crazy, outrageous stories and stuff like that. And also you can learn so much from those folks, I think, because it just allows you to tighten up your game. Like, eventually you take enough feedback. And the reason we have a masterclass is because I took enough feedback from people saying, this is unclear, this was boring the way you recorded this. And that's constructive feedback, I guess. More constructive than, like, you look like a blank and a blank and a blank, and you probably blank your blank. But you take enough of that feedback and you become airtight, which is pretty cool.
Another reason why I wanted to raise this topic is because I think, and I talk about it all the time, is that if you learn memory techniques and you use them, you are morally obligated to teach them to other people.
Agreed.
And I think that a lot of people would like to be able to actually, make a living out of a passion that they have.
Agreed.
But one thing that Dave Farrow pointed out when he was a guest on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast is there are a lot of people out there who teach memory techniques who actually aren't qualified to be teaching them because they haven't gone out and actually accomplished anything from those memory techniques. And I'm not a memory competitor, right? But I wonder if you would talk a little bit about what your feeling is about that. Like, how do you get to a point where you are satisfied that you could teach something that you've learned? You've become a super learner to the extent that now it's time for you to become a super teacher. Sure.
I struggle with this myself because I don't use a lot of the memory techniques that I use them, but I'm not going up to people and memorizing their credit card numbers and stuff like that. And I don't even memorize, to be honest, my own credit card numbers because I change credit cards every time there's like a new offer, and it's just proven to be useless to me. But at the same time, I do memorize, like, someone sold me a lock at the store the other day, and he was joking with me because he asked what I do, and I was like, I teach memory, blah, blah, blah. He's like, okay, I'm taking it out of the package, I'm not giving you the manual with the code. And he, like, just flashed it to me, and I still remember it. I'm not going to say it now in case someone steals my bike again, but and I still remember it because I just created a major method system for it. So I use the techniques, but not maybe as much as I'd like to. And I think my approach to that is actually, why not? I should start using them just for giggles to learn music, and that's why I've started piano. And to learn languages, I do actually use them quite extensively. But I don't memorize cards, and I think I should. I think I should because I talk about it, and I don't use PAO as much, and I think I should because I talk about it. But to answer your question, just to finish on that a little bit, actually, but I do speed read quite a bit, and I do learn quite aggressively, and I do take on learning projects, and I'm learning 3 instruments in 2 languages right now as we speak. And so I struggle with the parts of the course that I needed to put in there to be complete. Do I use them enough to really, really proselytize them? With that said, I believe in them, and I know that they work, and when I do use them, they work extraordinarily well. So even though I don't have a memory palace for every single book I read, I do use spaced repetition, and I do highlight in a certain way, which is kind of the super learner way of doing things. When are you good enough to teach these methods? Well, I think actually, and this touches on the brute force learning thing, something taught is something twice learned. And one of my best techniques, do you remember what I was reading when we were in Berlin together?
Oh, no.
It's okay if
I
not.
don't even remember observing what you were reading.
We didn't have much time for reading, but I was talking your ear off about this book, Sex at Dawn.
Oh, well,
I might have been talking someone else's ear off, but whatever book I'm reading at the time, I'm usually talking people's ear off about it. I was recently talking to you about Stephen Hawking and like how mind-blowing all this stuff was, and just reiterating. And I think the same is true of learning memory techniques. Like, you not only have an obligation, but you're highly incentivized to just share everything you learn. Like, I try to talk with you as much as I can about different things that I'm learning. I try to talk with all my friends. You know, we talked about mnemonics for music, as I mentioned, and the thing is, like, you learn something, you go out that night, you happen to be chatting with friends, share that knowledge with them. First off, it's way more interesting than talking about Donald Trump or political gossip or whatever. It's way more uplifting than talking about whatever god-awful event happened, you know, across the world in some terrible attack. And you're spreading knowledge, you're spreading wisdom, and you're reinforcing your old learning. I would hope that anyone who's taken my courses or your courses is going around, and when people say, "Oh, sorry, I forgot your name, I have a terrible memory," they stop and say, "You don't have a terrible memory, you don't know these powerful things called mnemonic techniques," and then explain, because that's a way more interesting first conversation with someone than what do you do and where do you live and all that junk that we're all so tired of answering.
I've certainly had many of those interesting conversations.
Right.
Which makes me, without going into a long spiel, but give the people listening to this podcast your assessment of what you've seen as someone who does, as me being someone who does practice these, and an honest one, given you've seen me make mistakes, you've seen me correct myself, and like as an example, efo ha she routine.
Perfect.
Right? And,
perfectly done.
Meeting people shy was a person that I named.
We should explain, though, to your audience what that means.
Oh, it means where's the washroom, right? But, I mean, I'm not going to go through a whole list of things, but, like, I remember memorizing something like pamaim.
Beautiful.
And that was two times, right? And
I will give you a glittering testimonial that you really do use this stuff.
But I want you to, like, also give a portrait of, the reality of what you saw.
Yeah.
With like the self-correction and like how I'm actually,
Yeah, absolutely. You use the techniques. You use them in a different way that I would use them, which is you like to go back and correct and clean up because that provides, I mean, there's merit in doing it both ways. You have these kinds of memorable, almost like slightly awkward situations where like you called Ilana Alana or Elena and stuff like that. Whereas, and that, then after that was memorable, right? Once you have this like red face moment, it's memorable. And with certain words, we've been like correcting the vowel pronunciations because we don't have a A sound in Hebrew. So it would be efo hashirutim, and we worked on that instead of afo or yefo, stuff like that. But I mean, I've been impressed, and you definitely use the methods. I think one thing that I've learned from you that's really great is knowingly or unknowingly, you take really good advantage of social pressure in the sense that like people ask and you tell them what you do and then you encourage them to challenge you. And that's, Tim Ferriss talks about this all the time, like setting good stakes. I should probably advertise more often, and I try to do it because I try not to do it because I don't like to be put on the spot too much. And then, you're walking down the street and 6 months later you see someone who frankly just didn't impress you that much or wasn't that memorable to you, and they're like, oh, you're the memory guy, But with that said, maybe I should be taking more advantage of that, and I should be, because it pushes you to use the techniques, and social pressure is kind of, social accountability, social pressure are kind of really powerful things that I could use to improve my practice of memory.
Yeah, well, I think you do have social pressure working in your favor in other respects. I mean,
right.
And my observation is, and it's absolutely incredible to me how that you can, we're talking about this or that subject, and the detail with which you go through the points that you want to make with names, dates, percentages.
Yeah.
Like you have this laser-like accuracy in the things that you want to talk about that I don't have like a mobile internet thing where I can like check your accuracy or whatever.
Sure.
But it's so obvious to me that what you're reciting comes from something not just that you've memorized something, but you've learned it so deeply that you've made it part of your knowledge base, right? And that you're able to report on findings, and
Sure.
inform other people from your mind, unassisted. And so this is, to me, the demonstration that you walk the walk and you talk
Thank
your
you,
talk,
sir.
and
Thank
and
you.
I just like I'm
I appreciate that very
constantly
much.
impressed by it, and also just what you do in recorded settings on on your podcast and so forth, because you refer to the people that you've interviewed on your podcast in ways that show me you've learned from what
Sure.
that you've done using your own learning approach.
Sure. You know what the craziest thing about it is, and I think you can probably testify to this as well, or attest to this as well. After a while, you become so confident in your memory, and your mind becomes so interconnected. I often don't need to use visual mnemonics anymore.
Right.
I often don't even need to, because my brain is just like a hyper connected network. And so like Ben Greenfield tells me something on the show and I just connect it. I mean, I guess maybe deep down intrinsically, yeah, I do have a specific image that I remember from when he told me why he doesn't use gyms and he likes to work out outdoors. I do have an image for that. But it's not like I'm sitting there and imagining. It's like I'm in conversations, I'm generating images as second nature, and they're all just interconnecting to everything that I know. And like, ironically, we talked about this in the last time we sat down with Jimmy and we recorded that, like, I really want to figure out a way to get like my brain tested and see, because I have a theory that just everything has become so interconnected. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about that I want your audience to know is, people are always like, oh, well, I learned Spanish and it pushed the Russian out of my... That is so not true. It's actually the more you use it, the more you have. And the more I learn, the more I'm able to learn, because I just have so many more connection points. And it's like, especially when you're learning about peripherally related things, like when I started learning about hormonal balance, I knew more about weightlifting than I did about supplementation, but I was able to fill out clusters of neural networks because the more you learn, the more you're able to learn, and the more you have as a basis. And so I would attribute that, like, I read a ton, I read a proper ton, and I talk to a lot of people, and I have a lot of conversations, and I learn from many different sources, and I think that's like the secret weapon.
Okay, well, I know a way to test your brain.
Do it.
So I'm going to create a hypothetical, and I want you to answer a question that I know is on a lot of people's minds, and that is, what do I do to get started on a particular thing? Like, what's the first step that I need to take? And
To learning a subject?
yeah, so what I'm going to do in this hypothetical is, there's now something called the Magnetic Memory Method Memory Championships. And that Memory Championships requires that you be able to memorize a deck of cards and recall the order of that deck of cards. It's been randomly shuffled under 20 seconds. You have 6 months in order to develop this skill, right? The
Yeah.
prize is $7 billion, okay? And I want to know what you're going to do as the first step in order to enable yourself to win that prize, knowing that you have 6 months to do it. What
Is the prize determined by speed or accuracy or what? Or it's just my ability to do it, period?
Just to keep it simple, anybody who can come and memorize a deck of cards and
Okay.
recall it. And now, let me condition this, though, because the way it typically works is that they count the time that you spent memorizing, right?
Sure.
But I want it to be that within 20 seconds, you can memorize it and recall it. Now, I know that's totally hypothetical, but if you were going, or that's totally impossible.
Yeah.
Because it does take longer to do the act of recall than it does to do the act of memorization. But just imagine that it were possible, right? That you could just go through a deck in 10 seconds, and then in another 10 seconds, you could say the order of what you saw, right?
Sure.
What is hour one of what a super learner is going to do to tackle this problem in order to win this prize?
Yeah, I think most people, especially if they read like some of Tim Ferriss's stuff, would be like, deconstruct the skill and understand. And that would be probably in the first hour of work. But the first thing I would do is set goals. So I need to know what my goal is, what do I need to be able to do, and then I would try to get in touch with my motivations. Because adult learners, as Malcolm Knowles taught us in 1955. There you go, setting statistic. A guy named Malcolm Knowles said that there are 5 requirements of adult andragogy, of the adult brain, to learn. And one of them is pressing need, and one of them is a good learning environment, a respectful learning environment. One of them is connection to prior knowledge, but another one is an understanding of why they're learning what they're learning. So I would connect with this $7 billion prize and ask, is that why I'm doing it, or am I doing it for pride, or am I doing it for whatever? And then I also need to know, what do I need to be able to do? What are my deliverables? I would set goals. I would break those goals down into steps. They would be SMART goals, specific, measurable, actionable, reasonable, timely goals. So by this month, I'll be doing it at 1 minute. By this month, I'll be doing it at 30 seconds, so on and so forth. And then I'd get into all the accelerated learning stuff that people know me for. I would talk to you. I would talk to my buddy Nelson Dellis. I would read probably a couple hundred pages of different books on people who've done it. I'd read anything Ben Pridmore's come out with. And I would not take this approach that many people do of like, no, I'm learning it this way, not this way. I'd learn it every possible way that I could, and then I'd just build a training schedule around my SMART goals, and I would just get it done.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So what would be a compelling reason to do something like that?
Ooh, for me, it comes down to like authenticity. The reason that I want to start playing around with memorizing cards is like, I want to walk the walk to talk the talk. I speed read, so I'm cool teaching speed reading. And I use memory techniques, so I'm cool teaching memory techniques. But I've taught PAO, and I don't really use it that much. So I want to start using it more. Even though I think it's important to give my audience like the full spectrum, on my show, I host people who talk about nutritarian eating and not eating too many animal products. And I don't really believe in that, but I think it's important to share the spectrum and expose people and let them create their own learning journey. This is something else that Knowles tells us. It's like, you need self-directed learning. It's important. Kids will just do the homework because the teacher said, but adults will need to kind of feel that they have ownership and agency in the learning process. That's what I said when I said ideal, respectful learning environment. A learning environment that respects their autonomous process. So yeah, sorry, I'm starting to melt here.
Yeah, we're getting hot, and we're going to put this episode to rest, but I really, really appreciate everything that you've said.
It's a pleasure, my brother.
I think that it's always empowering to hear your perspective on things, and I really, really appreciate that we could cover so much in this talk, and I really hope that you will put time into memorizing cards, because I'd love to powwow with you on it.
Let's do it.
Because I think that if we can walk away on one thing, is that the power of your friendships with people has a lot to do with shared terrain and territory.
Totally.
And the more you know, the more you can know, and that means the more people you can know and the more people you can connect with, and you are a great connector. So I really hope that people will find ways to connect with you by taking up your training as a first point of entry, for sure, and getting on your podcast mailing list and all the things that you do, so that they're learning more and more from you. So how can they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll put a link in the show notes, which Anthony is part of our ecosystem and stuff like that. And if you guys want to support the Magnetic Memory Method podcast, then use his link. And you can check me out. My personal website is jle.vi. You can check me out at becomingasuperhuman.com if you want to download some free podcast episodes. And check it out. Check out the show notes. I'm sure Anthony will have some resources for you guys.
Yeah, we're going to have a transcript of this. I don't know if it's going to be available immediately upon publishing, because we're going to hopefully get this out this week so that it's in sync with what I said at the beginning. But, thank you for tolerating the background noise. One of the things that I would point out is that we have and enjoy the success that we do because we jump on opportunity. And when preparation meets opportunity, there is no ceiling. So until the time that we speak again, keep that in mind, keep it in memory, and keep yourself magnetic.
Let's see. Oh no, where did it go? Let's make sure that saves, eh?